Hey there, welcome to the episode 67 of the coffee.Links audio program. I am your host, Dan Hugo. It is 6:54 in the morning of February 19, 2025, Wednesday. Hump day, half day, I don't know, whatever. Today we're going to talk about bad coffee, and it's something that I'm inspired to talk about from last night, which I will get into. If you've never heard coffee.Links before, coffee.Links is a term that I coined. I guess we decided it was about age 4 for something you probably call pins and needles, the return of circulation to probably a limb that perhaps you were sitting on or laying on your arm or your hand, your leg or whatever, foot. As the circulation returns, you might say pins and needles. I would say coffee.Links. It's a vanity audio essay channel wherein I tell stories, and maybe you can take something from it. I don't know that there will ever be guests on this audio program, but who knows? Hopefully wherever you found this audio program, you're able to locate the show notes in the episode description, the summary, and 4 links for today's episode. 2 shameless self-promotion, 2 YouTubers who are among a fairly sizable population of YouTube coffee experts, coffee explainers, coffee enthusiasts, equipment reviewers, etc. There's no shortage of people creating content around coffee on social media. But these are 2 of my favorites, so we'll get to that. So let's get to the show notes, the summary first, which I'll read to you now. If you've ever watched someone or been someone who requires a curious amount of cream or sugar or both in order to consume a cup of coffee, you must know that this is due to a complete lack of attention paid to the preparation of that coffee and to the effort required to learn how to prepare good coffee. Lack of attention to the effort required. Yeah. So, making good coffee is not, if coffee shops always made the coffee that required that much cream and sugar, would they stay in business? I don't know. I guess there's the caffeine. I must have caffeine no matter how awful it tastes, but it can and should taste pretty good. The links for today's episode, the shameless self-promotion, somewhat ironically, not really, coffee related, buymeacoffee.com/danhugo, DANHUGO. And the profile page that you will land on includes, among other things, some of my favorite coffee beans, which I have on hand often. Lavazza is a really good coffee, really decent price. It's decent coffee. 2 pounds for about $15 or $20. 2.2 pounds, in fact, 1 kilogram. It's good. It's good stuff. So I have a 2.2 pound bag of Lavazza beans that I could open at any moment, and some other Lavazza beans that have been opened, almost done. So you can check out my favorite beans and links to my other audio productions, some GitHub repos. There's a little bit of bio information at the top there, and above the biographical information is a link to the posts section. There's also a link to the post section at the very top of the web page. I think, depending on, I don't know if it's mobile. It may be in the mobile website /app also. Posts, wherein you will find the weekly, published Mondays, Buy Me an Update, available exclusively on Buy Me a Coffee for no other reason than why not. They host audio and video, so I thought I would try that out. So I think we're going to be on episode 14 this coming Monday. Basically, a quick overview of the week's previous episodes of audio programming, and then any upcoming announcements about things, so I can put them all in one place. And it's a way to make use of this platform, which I've had for years, and it's often used by content creators, open source developers, people that engage an audience in some way. So why not? And Ko-fi.com, ko-fi.com/danhugo, also DANHUGO. Here they only really enable text or other postings. They don't really host audio, and they don't really allow linking to Buy Me a Coffee for some odd reason. But I make use of both of these as a way to reach out to my listeners, my other participants in this, in all of this thing. So check those out if you like, and you can keep up to date on, especially on buymeacoffee.com. The profile has links to all the audio programs, and one of these days we'll get Hugo Floss actually rolled out. That one might be video. We'll see. Anyway, on with the show. We'll start out with a bad espresso, the inspiration for today's episode. Although it is arguable that the inspiration of today's episode came from years and years of bad and good coffee. This topic occurred to me as recently as last night. Yes, Tuesday night here in Vegas. After a fine Italian meal at a nice restaurant, maybe too nice, if we're judging by their coffee. Here at a resort to not be named, I asked for a double or doppio espresso rather than a sweet dessert. So should be simple, right? The food was quite good. So surely a double espresso would be a piece of cake. What arrived was a single or solo espresso solo, with a rock sugar stick to sweeten, which is already a little weird. I have not come across that too often. And what was in the cup, or demi-tasse, a little half a coffee cup, it was pretty small, was, well, awful. It was bitter and just bad. The sugar stick was essential. Maybe they knew that. And since let's take a moment to melt, the espresso, if I am still calling it that at this point, was cooling and not getting any better. So it became kind of a cooled off coffee syrup with the sugar in it. While I did finish the single, thanks to the completely altered flavor of the rock sugar in there, and it was cooled off, of course, I was amazed. No crema. That's the light brown foam you must find on top of an espresso. Otherwise, they did something very wrong. There was no mouthfeel, which is basically the result of a small amount of coffee fines, which yields a certain texture. So it's basically little teeny tiny flecks of coffee bean, the fines. Coarse? No, fine. And of course, no good flavor. How does this happen? Well, it's actually pretty easy. You must care. Coffee, like so many things, can be prepared well, or it can be prepared poorly. And I think it comes down to whether the person making the coffee really needs to do, or whether they did do, the two things that they need to do, which are these two things. First of all, taste the coffee. Not necessarily my cup of coffee, but prepare coffee and taste it. Make sure that your beans are okay, that your scale is doing what you think it's doing, that the water temperature is still right. Right? All these little factors, these little variables that you can tweak can make the difference between a mediocre or even bad espresso, for example. Make sure that boiler is boiling. Make sure your pressure is correct. Make sure you're not channeling. I'm going to suspect that they overpacked the portafilter and they got channeling because the grind hopefully was set by someone else. But the human factor, if they did use a espresso machine, you don't get a good crema, you get really awful flavor. And although this was bitter, it was not astringent, so not sure, but totally unacceptable at a place of this caliber, I guess you could say. So even if coffee is not for you, if you're not a drinker of coffee, if you are a maker of coffee, you really need to know what is happening with the cup or carafe you are preparing and presumably giving to someone so that they might go, bleh, I'm going to go home and make a podcast audio episode about this. So you should taste using the methods that you're using to prepare coffee for others and just make sure. And this, any cook or chef knows this also. You should iterate. Know what to do if your coffee is bitter, muddy, astringent, too weak, too strong. And of course, understand that some people may somehow prefer a weak cup of coffee or an overly strong coffee, which can also be a bit much sometimes. But know how to tune these outcomes to a generally better and more flavorful and thus more enjoyable beverage. I'm still on the fence because the dinner was quite nice, but the espresso was it had to be saved with sugar, and that's never a good sign, as I intimated in the summary of today's episode. Before I discovered the difference between crap coffee and good coffee, I had only had the worst experiences. I worked at McDonald's when I was in high school, where we would open a bag of ground coffee, place it in the commercial drip brewer, hit a button, and let the coffee reduce down to who knows what. Because if people didn't drink the coffee, it would just sit there. It would sit there all day. I think it was supposed to sit there for 30 minutes, but nobody really paid attention. We were high school kids. We're not sitting there drinking drip coffee at McDonald's. It was probably awful, but I didn't know. I never tried it. Never, not once. The difference, by example, was when I worked at Salon.com, online magazine. I think they're still in business. Many, many years later, this would have been 2005, where I was the first one in the office. And so took the task of making the coffee, which was nearly identical to the McDonald's process. Open a pre-measured bag of coffee through the whatever service provider of the coffee subscription for an office. These are not uncommon. And I would put it into the basket with the filter for the kind of industrial looking, but still just a drip coffee machine. It actually had like a shower head to spread to distribute the water, the hot water, onto the coffee bed in the filter, and then it would come out, of course, like usual, drip coffee into the urn, and then you could just go and toggle the little valve and get some coffee out of it. So it would brew. We probably had about 30 people in that office in San Francisco, so it was probably enough for everybody to have half a cup. I mean, at some point you'd make some more, but anyway, the coffee was bitter. It was not good, and the machine was expensive, and I'm sure the coffee service was expensive to have that replenished now and then, but it just wasn't good. It tasted like the coffee was burning. Like maybe that water's too hot, which, by the way, is a possibility. But it's more likely that the amount of water that was flowing through, it was the grind, the water, the temperature, all these variables probably over extracting and becoming bitter. So this did though get the ball rolling. Farhad Manjoo was a writer at the Salon magazine, and we were commenting that the coffee was bad. I said, have you heard about this AeroPress? The guy who made the Aerobee Frisbee is now making a coffee press that costs $40 and it's supposed to be really good. And he's like, oh, I'll write to them and have them send me a sample unit so I can write a review about it, and then we can try it. And I said, oh, okay. Now, an AeroPress can be had today for about $40. So I don't remember how much it was back then, or if they were difficult to get because it was a brand new product. Either way, Farhad came through. He got the AeroPress. We all tried it. The coffee was by comparison amazing, and we didn't even know what we were doing. We were just trying the very basic use of the AeroPress as recommended by the founder. And I'll let you figure out his name. He's on there. He's out in the world, still churning out new AeroPress devices, including one now that's made of metal and glass, and I think it's like $150. Probably does the same thing for $40. So as it happens, though, it was this bad coffee machine at Salon that led to my kind of eye-opening discovery. Like, oh, you can actually make good coffee. It's not that I'm not enjoying coffee. It's that I am not enjoying the coffee that I have access to. And I'll say we've all been to a Starbucks. We've all been to a coffee shop, right? That's not unusual in the Silicon Valley days when I first moved there in 1993. You could go have a coffee somewhere. You'd stop off with your coworkers and have a coffee. Anybody want to go have a coffee? This kind of thing. But I was realizing it wasn't really great. And Starbucks is not really great. It's okay. People often will go to Starbucks and they just get their foofy drinks, if you like, a Frappuccino or something with cream, or now matcha or whatever. So you're getting these mixed drinks, these coffee cocktails. But if you just go and get a drip coffee at Starbucks, it's not great. I got to say, it's not amazing. So you really got to add cream and sugar, maybe lots of it, or salted foams, or who knows what. So you may or may not be getting the best experience if you go to a Starbucks. Peet's Coffee, that's the first time I ever had a French press. They give you the French press to have at the table, and you can just work it as you like. And I was like, oh, wow, this is actually pretty good. So Peet's Coffee, arguably better, not as easy to find, especially here in Vegas. All that said, this episode is not a tutorial. I'm not going to try to explain how to make a good cup of coffee. That's for you to discover. But I would recommend, since I did not go over the links for my two guys here, I would recommend that you peruse YouTube. There are articles, there are tutorials, there are whole books. But I have found James Hoffmann, So going back to the link section, James Hoffman. And if you're just going to type this into YouTube, he's got the @ symbol. So his channel name is James, James, Hoffman, Hoffmann, James Hoffman. Known for his quirky hairstyle, his British sensibilities, and his award-winning coffee technique. And he's really good about reviewing things. He's very thorough, very detailed. He's got some really good episodes about how to use a French press and how to make a really good cup of coffee with a French press. Pour over, French press, espresso machines, grinders, grinder cost, hand grinders, and so on. The same with Lance Hedrick, also available with his @ symbol channel at Lance Hedrick on YouTube. LANCEHED, as in Dan, RICK, Hedrick. So James and Lance, and again, there's tons. There are tons of really good, and I just wanted to keep it to two here. There are all kinds of people doing all kinds of coffee preparations and coffee methodologies and coffee device reviews. Lance Hedrick will sing every once in a while, and I think he becomes overly caffeinated and so gets pretty hyper sometimes. But James is always his cool British self. So go to the people like that, or you'll find the really good coffee explainers, coffee communicators. But I'm not going to fill you in on the secrets of coffee preparation. I really don't know too many, and I've kind of got my own thing. I make coffee for myself, and I'm going to give you advice that I have not followed myself later. But I have linked to the two of my favorite coffee communicators, both quite good in their own ways. So they'll explain and demonstrate all kinds of things, including how to make use of good and not so good equipment. So how to make the most of your not so expensive grinder. Like, I don't have an expensive grinder. I have like the lowest burr grinder that is recommended for like an entry level. I would like to make good coffee, but it's not a $2,000. It's a Baratza Encore. I think it is for $140 now. You can get it. You can spend $1,000 on a grinder. Don't do that. Not yet. But and they try to explain what the coffee is doing when they're doing these demonstrations, and they have to use words rather than you tasting because you're not there with them. So you'll hear these terms like astringent and acidic and muddy and whatnot, and they'll tell you what those mean, but you have to hunt down those particular videos where they walk you through dialing in your process. So when you're dialing in, you're saying, okay, how much water? What's the temperature? How much time should it be brewing? What is the roast? What is the grind size? What is the amount of coffee? The weight of the beans? How much accumulation is there, or retention? Grind retention, I think they call it, in the grinder. So if I put 1 gram of coffee in and I grind it, do I get 1 gram of ground coffee out, or is there some remaining behind? So knowing all of these things, they can walk you through what to adjust if you're encountering certain taste components. And so they describe all those. So if you hunt down, or you can look up astringent coffee or bitter coffee, and they'll say, oh, you're over extracting, you're under extracting, the water's too hot, etc. So these are the sorts of things you'll find in these coffee tutorials. There is no substitute for practice, though. So the pandemic was almost certainly the origin story for many a new or better home barista out there, myself included, due in no small part to the fact that there was opportunity to brew a couple of cups, not just one and go, right? Now you're home, you're not going anywhere, you're not going far anyway. So there was time to, this coffee tastes a little bitter. Let me make another one. I don't know if anybody did that, but I've done my fair share of experimenting myself. Nothing better to do sometimes. So there was an opportunity to brew those extra cups and try things. So you could adjust your grind size if you have a grinder, and I hope you do. You could pick different kinds of beans if you like dark or medium, espresso, light. I even have some white coffee, which is like the lowest amount of roasting that can be done on a coffee bean. And the beans are hard, and it's the roasting that softens them up so they become grindable. And white coffee, that is so lightly roasted, it's still white, or it's kind of off-white. It cannot be ground with most grinders, so that it's just better to get it pre-ground. And you lose some flavor over time and stuff. It's always better to get beans. But I will tell you, it has kind of a pistachio flavor to it. It's very unusual. I found that making an espresso or in a mocha pot, making white coffee in a mocha pot and then Americano style. So then you add boiling water, or not, you add hot water. Don't drink boiling water. That's crazy. You add some hot water to it, and it softens the flavor a little bit, dilutes it a little bit. It's pretty good. It's very unusual. White coffee. And so you maybe you had an opportunity to try some different types of beans, like single origin versus blended beans, Arabica versus Robusta. And there are others, and there's single wash, and there's all these other honey. What is it? Honey beans? No, honey. I can't remember what that. There are a variety of different types of coffee, and if you get them as beans, you can even roast them yourself if you want. The method that you choose, you might have pour over, French press, AeroPress, drip. The list goes on. There are a few ways. French press, of course. And of course, the finer points like weighing beans and water and input and output amounts of each, along with water temperature and what is called thermal management. That's where you keep things at the temperature you want, including the cup into which your coffee will pour it. If you've ever seen demi-tasse and coffee cups in general resting on top of a espresso machine at a coffee shop, those are warming on top of the espresso machine. So they'll be warm when they put. If you take a cold ceramic cup and you put your hot coffee in it, now you don't have hot coffee anymore. You have a warmer cup and a cooler liquid inside of it. So thermal management, part of the process. Experiment with some of these variables to see what appeals to your own taste and write things down. You should write things down. I have a notebook near my coffee corner of my kitchen, and I've jotted down a few notes in there. I've pretty much got my favorites working, but if I were to get a new coffee or a new device, which is not likely in the very near term, but you never know, then you start dialing it in again. And if you go from a bitter and awful to flavorful and actually good cup of coffee, you should be able to reproduce that outcome whenever you like, which means you write down what you did. Like, 34 grams instead of 35, or 22 instead of 24 grams of water. That's too little water, but you know what I'm saying. So you write these things down. This is sometimes called dialing in, as I've said. So if you're going to dial in a new coffee bean or a new grinder or a new, if you get an espresso machine or you get a new anything, you got to figure out, what is this doing to what I have already done? Like, okay, this particular grinder, it's a little bit more finicky in this range of the grind size. So I gotta adjust a little bit coarser than normal to get what I'm hoping for my particular methods, etc., etc. Again, not a tutorial, but there's just a lot to be aware of if you want to tackle making good coffee, unlike the restaurant from last night. So if you have a new method you're trying out, during the pandemic, it was possible to get, which I'll get into in a moment here, but it was possible to get a pour-over coffee device, which I have from Bodum, B-O-D-U-M, Bodum, a pour-over coffee device for $20. It's a little sort of rounded vessel of borosilicate glass with a plastic mesh. You can put a coffee filter in there if you like, but put your coffee in there, you pour over. It's fine. It's not a Chemex or a V60. Those are much more expensive, but you can taste the difference in the way a percolation method works over a immersion method and the bloom and all this other fun stuff that you'll learn about. So obviously, you should make coffee for other people, which I tend to not do just because I just don't. But if you are a home barista, if you've made coffee for yourself during the pandemic or in general, you probably learned to make a coffee that you like and it tastes fine. You're like, yeah, I enjoy this quite a bit. I don't have to throw so much sugar and cream into it to make it something I enjoy maybe every day. Maybe I'm an addict now that I make such good coffee. And this is where you left your experiments. You're done. Everything's good. However, you might be leaving out some good flavors, or you're reaching one particular extraction outcome. Maybe if you added 10 grams of coffee on the input side, or maybe if your water temperature was, if you poured the coffee over your pour over 5 degrees hotter, say Celsius, or 5 degrees cooler, right? Darker roasts, you probably don't want to go with fully boiling water. You take it off the boil for 30 seconds or so. With a lighter roast, you do want to have hotter water. So stuff like that. So you may be missing out on look at that. And if you make coffee for someone else, or maybe they make coffee for you, you will say, oh, okay, I didn't really think about this. If you go to a coffee shop, you probably aren't even thinking about the coffee you're getting. You're probably there to meet a friend or do some work or just hang out. So you may or may not be thinking, this is an espresso, but I have purchased these very beans. And this happened to me once. I purchased some pink Bourbon beans from South America from a local coffee shop here in Vegas. Their coffee was amazing. It was really strange, but had a really it was pink. So the coffee beverage, if you held it up, kind of looked at it from the side, there was like a little pinkness, a little pink glow off of it. It's like when somebody who has dark hair puts like really dark purple dye in their hair. You can see the purple if the sun hits it right. So it's kind of like that. So it wasn't like a pink cup of coffee, but there was like a pink sort of reflection or something, a little aura of pink. And it's just the nature of the beans, but it was really good. It was very nice. So I got some of these beans, came home. No, I couldn't get that far. It was good. There was nothing wrong with it, but clearly there was something lacking and it's not the end of the world, but you're like, hey, I bought these beans. I spent money on them. I should be able to get as much as I can from them. So why not? So if you are able to learn that from other people, a little taste tester, hey, if you try upping the pressure on your boiler there, or try this, try that, and you might be able to get that little extra. And again, you've paid for them. Why not? You should and you could and you should aim for the best outcomes. And it's not magic. You just have to practice. I know, crazy, right? My coffee journey is not too exciting, really. I guess I didn't talk about traveling and stuff. So when you travel in other parts of the world, coffee is probably more of an expectation. Like if you're in Japan having a meeting with your typical Japanese businessman, there's going to be coffee during the day. There's going to be coffee. If you are in Italy, there's going to be a good espresso. Don't say espresso. And there's also going to be no cappuccino after 10 a.m. Don't forget. That's just the thing. You can have cappuccino anytime you want anywhere else. But if you're in Italy, do yourself a favor. Go for a latte if it's after 10. Some people might say after 11 or something, but look good in Italy. Play it safe. After 10, latte. I was not a coffee drinker when I was working at McDonald's in my high school days, and that continued into college. Believe it or not, I was not a coffee drinker in college. I just stayed up naturally, I guess. I did develop a fondness for chocolate-covered espresso beans at some point, but they're not practical. Espresso roast does make the beans a little bit brittle, so they're easier to chew. So you're not going to find chocolate-covered white roast. You'd break your teeth on those. So the roasting makes the beans brittle enough to be ground more easily. Espresso is more easily ground than a light roast, a medium roast. So they get easier and easier as the roasting breaks down more and more of the bean structure. So I got into the chocolate-covered espresso beans, and they were okay, but for my late night studying and whatnot. But my senior year, I was hooked on Thai iced tea and Thai iced coffee from the Salam Luang Cafe, which was open till 3 a.m. So perfect for late night study breaks. But these are so much sugar that they're essentially a frappuccino. They're the ratios of sugar to coffee. It's not quite a milkshake, but ridiculous amounts of sugar. And then I used to get it black, half and half. But if you're a Thai tea or Thai coffee fan, you know that there's usually some half and half or cream on top of the beverage. And probably made it worse by having it black, because you might as well get some dairy fat in you at the same time. Anyway, the salon experience was the first time I was actually a not so knowledgeable coffee drinker, but I had by this point been visiting a coffee shop here and there and was familiar, and I was okay with coffee. I was not overly thrilled with it. I did not really quite understand the options to make the commercial coffee brewer they had there actually make drinkable coffee. So it's kind of a black box, if you like. I don't know what it's doing. It's just not making good coffee. It was not good. It was pretty bad, in fact. It's pretty bitter. Thanks to Farhad Manju, I think I mentioned him already, having AeroPress send him that sample unit to review, my eyes were opened to better and actually easier, super easy ways to make coffee that was actually good. It actually is good today, even. So many years later. This was 2005, so 20 years or so of easier to make good coffee than you would imagine. Obviously, the pandemic led me to that solo barista phase, and I've kind of jumped over some, just through the years, hanging out in coffee shops in Sunnyvale. So when I left Salon, because that was not the place for me, there were coffee shops on Murphy Avenue in Sunnyvale, and then we would go to the coffee shops in Mountain View or other places. There was a really cool coffee shop in, I think it was Saratoga. That was like a house that they converted into a multi-story coffee shop hangout place. It's no longer. I don't think it survived the pandemic, but no, might have closed before that. But either way, so there were cool spots and whatnot. I was becoming more and more familiar, but I really didn't know how to make good coffee. I would just encounter it now and then. So the salon experience was the first time I kind of went, wait a minute, this is awful. Why is this so bad? And then the AeroPress opportunity arose, and it was good. So the Bodrum pour over, like I said, has been a really good introduction to the difference between a pour over and a immersion brewer. So if you're doing drip coffee, that's a percolator, and pour over is a percolate. So percolation is when the coffee is percolating through the water is percolating through the ground beans. So you basically have an input and an output, and the coffee flows through there. Espresso, you have the water coming in at the top, and the pressure of the boiler, or if you're pressing yourself with the lever, you're going to press that water through the beans, the ground coffee. AeroPress is a combined immersion brewer, like a French press, but also a percolator. So you allow the coffee to, you can set how long it is immersed, how long it's brewing, by just not pushing it through. You don't have quite that option with most drip coffee machines. The coffee just goes through the ground beans in your basket with your filter, probably, and flows through into a pot or a carafe or maybe a cup at the bottom. So it's percolating through. But with the AeroPress, you can actually have immersion like a French press and then press it through almost like an espresso or drip coffee, right? But you're pressing it through the beans, the ground beans, through an exit filter into a cup or carafe. So it's a different type of combination of devices. And there's all kinds of fun ways. There's what do you call it? The suction coffee. There's I'm totally spacing on some other cool methods. There's Turkish coffee, of course, with the hot sand. Ethiopian coffee, you roast the beans and then you grind them immediately, so it's all one big, raw beans to coffee, like in one fell swoop. Vietnamese iced coffee with the fin, I do have one of those. So it's a little metal thing with holes in the bottom of it that they pour the coffee in. They put the ground coffee in, pour the hot water in there, and they have it resting on usually a glass with some ice and some sweetened condensed milk. And so you're going to be making yourself a Vietnamese iced coffee. There you want to get like a real Robusta, sort of a bitter bean with higher caffeine. So those are good. So yeah, you get to try all these ways. I got a fin. I think it's a fin, right? PHIN in American English characters for Vietnamese pour over coffee style percolator, and I think it was $10. So you can try a lot of different things at a pretty reasonable price. AeroPress, I think today they're $40. They probably were more expensive when they first came out. They've gone through some manufacturing improvements. They don't have BPFs in the plastic now, so they've improved that. And they have different colors now and all that stuff. And then I mentioned they have this metal and glass one, which is too ridiculously expensive. But for about $40, you get a completely functional, very accessible and acceptable coffee preparation device that can do more than you would think. Getting a nice grinder is key, which I did do at some point. The grinder I mentioned, the Baratza Encore, is about probably the lowest you want to go if you're going to try to really make good coffee. You can grind with a lot of different things, but if you want the grinder to be a good starting point, the Baratza Encore is fine. I think they're $140 now. That could be your big splurge if you like. But then at some point, I had some consulting money in the bank. I was like, I really want to try this Flair Pro so I can make my own espresso at home, but not invest hundreds, 500 more in a home espresso machine. Now you can get those cheaper, which are pretty I think DeLongo has one that's like $150. So I got my Flair Pro manual press, And the thing about a manual press is you can look at the little pressure gauge that it comes with. You know how much you're pressing on it. You can adjust that to taste, and you can learn about how this whole process works. So it's like the difference between driving a standard transmission, which probably nobody does anymore, and automatic. So you get to actually know what you're doing or learn what you're doing. It takes up less counter space for manual. So if you may not think that's a real espresso machine. If you have a real one, you may think, hand press, but they're fine. Having a good espresso in a coffee shop or a nice restaurant is one thing, but actually knowing how to prepare a good espresso at home using a 100% manual lever machine or an automated machine if you must, you will know from that point on where a bad coffee comes from. It comes from a lack of attention to detail and a complete lack of knowledge and practice. And that's what I experienced last night, which was disappointing, not depressing, disappointing. They could have done better. We'll edit there to the notes. And I think everybody that has a bad coffee should have an opportunity to learn. There are people that worship coffee. That's not the case here. But the fact of the matter is, if you're going to get into some sort of artisanal beverage preparation, it's a practical matter. You can be at home. If you get yourself a drip coffee machine and you're like, why is this coffee coming out so bitter all the time? Try less coffee. Reduce the amount of coffee grounds in the basket in the filter, so that the water travels a shorter distance, so it has less percolation to do. It will not over extract because it's not in the coffee for as long before it exits through the bottom and into your cup or pot or carafe. So if you reduce the extraction, you are going to reduce the bitterness probably. If you have not enough coffee, you'll get an astringent or maybe even like a muddy, depending on probably the water temperature. But essentially what you can do is you start to see that, I can actually, let me adjust the amount. Let me adjust if you're doing full manual, of course, let me adjust the water temperature. Let me adjust the weight of the beans. Let me adjust the grind coarseness or fineness, right? The grind size. Let me try a lighter roast. There's all kinds of variables that you can adjust. It's not infinite. It's a manageable number of things, but you can actually come out with, I didn't have to spend $5 or $8 on a single beverage. My coffee cost basically is about $1 to $1.50 for at least a grande. If you're going to go Starbucks sizes, at least a 16 ounce output, $1.50, maybe $1. If it was just coffee black, probably $1. If I'm making a cappuccino before 10, probably more like $1.50, but maybe not, maybe more like $1.20. Either way, when you can actually make good stuff, you realize what's going on when people make bad stuff, and you say to yourself, they charged me $5 for this, or whatever the espresso was last night. This is not good. I know I can do better. I should just have coffee at home and then become antisocial and stay awake all night drinking coffee. I will end with a kind of a fun story. I was at a hackathon at First Build in Kentucky. First Build was a GE Appliances kind of makerspace for prototyping products and whatnot, and they hosted a hackathon when I was working with Intel. And GE Appliances were sold off to Haier, which is a South Korean company. I think it's Haier, Haiar, maybe. I think they still have the makerspace, but either way, First Build, they had a bunch of GE appliances, and you could hack on an appliance, if a refrigerator or an oven or whatnot. So a team of GE appliance employees came to the hackathon. Now this arguably, they kind of stacked the deck a little bit because they were employees, but they did eventually try to productize this thing. But what they did was they converted a GE convection oven into a coffee roaster. So they used an Arduino Mega, I believe it was, and some other tools, and they put temperature sensors all over the oven, and there was some other measurements they were taking. The goal was to be able to have a really good roasted coffee using a convection oven. And so that was it. So when I was at this event, I was there on behalf of Intel, of course, so I was hanging around. Usually people stay up all night at hackathons. And so I happened to be sitting near where they were experimenting with their device. And they said, hey, would you be willing to sample our coffee? And so, well, yeah, sure. So they had a grinder, and so they would roast these beans and grind them. Now, technically, when you first roast beans, Ethiopian notwithstanding, the beans, the whole thing is going to need to rest for a while. Usually 2 to 4 weeks is pretty good. So when you first roast those beans, maybe they're going to put the beans in a bag and seal it up with a little vent hole. They're degassing. There are gases coming off the beans. And the flavor will kind of level out after 2 to 4 weeks. So roasting, grinding, and brewing all in the space of minutes is not really a completely fair test. But that said, I did try, and their coffee did improve through these 48 hours or so. But it was not great to start, but I'm like, yeah, I might as well. If I'm staying up, I might as well. So it was a caffeine bonus for trying all the stuff, and I stayed up and helped other people through the entire event, which I typically did anyway. But having so much coffee as part of this little experiment they were making was interesting. At the end of the day, as they were approaching the end of the hackathon and the tuning of this device, they were actually, and again, for coffee that was not resting, so they were roasting and grinding and brewing almost in one big step. So you're not going to get the best version of your home roasting this way, but it was actually pretty good. I was like, hey, this is you could actually taste the improvement through the process. So that was kind of fun. It was another piece of my educational journey. If you're going to get into coffee and you choose to get into roasting, that's a whole other element of this whole thing. So something to think about. There's you can figure out what kind of minerals you want in your coffee. You can get a TDS meter and measure your total dissolved solids. Figure out how much caffeine is actually in your cup, how much of the fines are getting through. So how much of that coffee is, because obviously the coffee is the color of coffee because of some of the coffee getting into your cup, right? The actual coffee. So in espresso, it happens that some of the fines, these finely ground, the dust of the grinder, some of that gets in there and it actually adds to the texture, and they call that mouthfeel. All kinds of stuff. And if you become interested in coffee, it is fun, and it's not an overly expensive hobby to just kind of play around with. You can spend as much money as you don't have on coffee devices and equipment. And if you get to that point, send me your YouTube channel and I will watch it. Take it easy. Thanks for listening as always. And don't forget, you can visit buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo and find my Buy Me an Update Monday updates, my microcast. I didn't mention this. They're under 5 minutes. I know it's hard to believe. Thank you for listening. Take care and go have a good coffee for once. Bye-bye.